who went off on Brett Ratner, the director, about the Epstein files, and he's all over them. That's just blatantly false. That's an absolute lie.
Just to be clear, she was talking about the allegations about Brett Ratner were actually not related to the Epstein files that caused him to be,
I know she mentioned
his
something
fall
about
from
it. She
grace,
said
so
the
to
term
speak,
he was
in
all
Hollywood.
over the Epstein files, and he's not. There's a picture of him and his fiancée with Jeffrey Epstein.
But there are other allegations against Brett Ratner
that have nothing to do with
the Epstein files. That's also what.
But I mean, the bottom line is, I don't know how Todd Blanche covered up for Donald Trump regarding the Epstein files.
In this video, Abby Phillip stops her show and calls out Arthur Aidla for making a misleading claim on Newsnight with Abby Phillip. One issue that continues to come up in Washington is whether the Justice Department is truly working for the American people, or if it is being influenced by political interests. That's why making this discussion so important. The larger question goes beyond any one individual. It is about whether the law is applied equally to everyone, or if political loyalty is starting to matter more than justice itself. So let's get into it and watch how Abby Phillip pushes back against Arthur Aidla on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
You know, Arthur, that's quite the view of the DOJ. I mean, I think about all the various things that the DOJ is responsible for prosecuting. And it seems like Todd Blanche seems to think that the most important thing is finding attorneys anywhere in the nation who want to go after President Trump's perceived enemies.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that was my takeaway from that. Look.
What was your takeaway from it?
Well, let me just give you a little my basis of speaking here. I work in the community where Todd was a U.S. attorney in the Southern District. I didn't know him personally then. I did have an encounter with him when he was representing the president in the courthouse. But he does enjoy amongst his colleagues an excellent reputation for his integrity, his knowledge of the law, and knowing, look, if you could look at the Trump administration, there are a lot of people who are in positions, and we may talk about one of them today, that really have no reason to be there. Todd does know the law. I mean, he knows the federal law, and he was in the Southern District, and that's where he was trained. I think a lot of people in the legal community who have to deal with not the stories you cover, but the day in and day out cases that I deal with on a regular, but not the headline cases. No. They're happy to have Todd Blanche there because he's level-headed, he's reasonable, and he was the DAG. The Deputy Attorney General really runs the office. Now, when people say about the Epstein files, he was covering up for Trump. No one is. There's so much misconception. You had Ana Navarro on here who went off on Brett Ratner, the director, about the Epstein files, and he's all over them. That's just blatantly false. That's an absolute lie.
Just to be clear, she was talking about the allegations about Brett Ratner were actually not related to the Epstein files that caused him to be,
Well, I know she mentioned
his
something
fall
about
from
it.
grace,
She said
so
the
to
term
speak,
he was
in
all
Hollywood.
over the Epstein files, and he's not. There's a picture of him and his fiancée with Jeffrey Epstein.
But there are other allegations against Brett Ratner
that have nothing to do with
the Epstein files. That's also what.
But I mean, the bottom line is, I don't know how Todd Blanche covered up for Donald Trump regarding the Epstein files. Well, there may be ways that the Epstein files came out that people aren't happy with, I don't think that's one of them.
I can tell you how he covered up for him. Todd Blanche went down to Florida and met with Ghislaine Maxwell.
My client. Ghislaine Maxwell, my client.
Met with her in prison, and then mysteriously she ends up in a lower security prison in Texas. But that does not.
But you said at the time, Arthur, that you thought that was basically a quid pro quo.
Let me just be very clear. I don't know that for a fact. I want to make that blatantly clear. I've spoken to Ghislaine not that long ago. First of all, people get moved within the system all the time. They just moved Keith Raniere, who's doing 120 years to a less restrictive.
But you basically said, I mean, let's I believe you. I believe you when you say maybe you don't know firsthand exactly what transpired in that conversation. But you basically said that no one would avail their client in a situation like that unless they were getting something out of it, and that the move from a high security prison to a low security prison would be. I'll use your words.
And that's really the heart of the issue here. The Justice Department is not supposed to function as a president's personal legal defense team. Its credibility depends on the public believing that the same rules and standards apply to everyone, whether you're a former president, a close political ally, or an ordinary citizen. And that's where the optics become a serious concern. When senior DOJ officials are involved in highly sensitive matters that appear connected to a president's personal interests, people are naturally going to ask questions, even if nothing inappropriate actually took place. Public trust can still suffer when there isn't enough transparency. The Maxwell situation is a perfect example. Prison transfers happen within the federal system all the time, but because this case is so high profile, every decision and every development receives intense scrutiny. That's why the Justice Department has traditionally tried to avoid not only actual conflicts of interest, but even the appearance of them. Public confidence is not based solely on what happened behind the scenes. It also depends on whether people believe the process was handled fairly and without bias. What Keith and Abby are pointing to reflects a broader concern that has been growing for years. Americans have watched both political parties accuse the DOJ of being weaponized whenever investigations fail to produce the outcomes they want. Multiple public surveys have shown that trust in major institutions, including the justice system, has dropped significantly over the past decade. That erosion of trust did not happen all at once. And if we're being consistent, it's fair to say that if a Democratic administration had DOJ officials meeting with people connected to a politically explosive case, while questions surrounded the president's interests, conservatives would be demanding explanations every day. The standard should remain the same no matter which party is involved. The real danger is what happens over time. Once people begin to believe that justice is influenced by political relationships and connections, rebuilding that trust becomes extremely difficult.
A common sense outcome.
Let me just make it very clear. I did not represent Ghislaine on the conversations with Todd. We did her appeal. But yes, I'm not going to bring any client in to see any prosecutor unless I know there's some benefit for my client.
Is that ethical?
Of course it's the way the system works.
No.
Tell me, what do you mean it's not ethical? It's the way it works every day.
Is that ethical in the context of the crimes that she was convicted of?
And that's what I was going to say.
That's the real question.
Moving from one prison for 20 years to another prison for 20 years?
To a low security prison that she is actually not supposed to be in.
Well, let me just say this.
Yeah.
Todd Blanche probably does know the law really well, but his application of the law is, I think, what is in question right now. And we all know there are different types of lawyers out here, just like there are different types of salespeople out there. Some sell snake oil and some sell actually real goods that are going to be help.
Like coconut oil.
Coconut oil. Right?
Coconut.
We were talking about.
Coconut oil.
Very funny, aren't there? But I think a couple of things. One, Pam Bondi making this omission or this basically confession that Todd Blanche was over the Epstein files. One, clearly a woman scorned. She's pissed, right? And so she's like, I'm letting everybody know where the body's buried. And actually, I believe that because if you've ever worked with the DOJ in an administration, you do know the AG and the DAG actually do have separate portfolios. And while they do confer, a lot of times they move policy separately. So the strong likelihood that the DAG probably actually, meaning the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, actually was leading on the Epstein files and covered up, which makes, though, the point about his character as the Attorney General even more questionable. And this is now transcended party. You have people who are in MAGA, you have people who are Democrats, you have independents who are really concerned at the handling, not just at the Trump administration, but many of his administrations handling of the Epstein files. But because Trump ran on this as being so transparent, and there is now a law that is passed about transparency and they still aren't being completely transparent, it raises questions. On top of Todd Blanche in every act while he was acting, doing as many things possible to accommodate Donald Trump's promises of retribution, especially with the backdrop of Pam Bondi getting fired because Donald Trump didn't think she did it well enough. So when that fact pattern happens,
that part is going to be a problem for him on Capitol Hill. John Cornyn says being Attorney General is probably one of the hardest jobs in the cabinet because you're working for the president, but you're also supposed to be tell the president no.
Yes.
As the lead lawyer for the country, I'm going to let the process work. And Tom Tillis also says he probably wants to see something on the actual dissolution of the slush fund before he would consider it. So, yeah, Todd Blanche is probably going to have to answer Is he willing to tell President Trump no, or does he just think that President Trump is still his client like he was in the private sector?
The Justice Department has always relied heavily on public trust. Attorneys general from both Republican and Democratic administrations have repeatedly argued that the DOJ earns credibility by being independent enough to tell presidents no when the situation requires it. That's why there has historically been such a strong effort to maintain a clear separation between the White House and criminal investigations. The Epstein controversy highlights exactly why transparency is so important. For years, politicians, media figures, and even many of Trump's own supporters pushed for more information related to Epstein to be made public. When an administration campaigns on promises of openness and accountability, but then struggles to provide clear and consistent answers, people are naturally going to become skeptical. That's not necessarily a partisan response. It's simply how the public reacts when questions go unanswered. And politically, this issue is no longer limited to Democrats. Conservatives, libertarians, MAGA supporters, and independent voters have all been raising a similar concern. If everything was handled properly, why does it seem so difficult for anyone to get a direct answer? The larger problem is the perception of favoritism, because in government, public perception often matters nearly as much as reality itself. Ethics experts have long maintained that public officials should avoid not only genuine conflicts of interest, but also situations that create the appearance of one. Once people begin to suspect that influential individuals are being treated differently from everyone else, trust in institutions starts to weaken. That's also one reason why the debate surrounding the so-called slush fund continues to attract criticism. Even several Republican senators have openly voiced concerns about oversight, transparency, and constitutional authority. When criticism starts coming from members of your own party, it's usually a sign that the issue goes beyond ordinary political disagreements. And if we're being honest, if a Democratic administration had a deputy attorney general playing a major role in controversial investigations, high-profile prison discussions, and politically sensitive settlements connected to the president's interests, conservatives would almost certainly be calling for hearings nonstop. The standard should remain the same, regardless of which party happens to be in power.
Well, I think there's a couple things going on here. One, I think Pam Bondi has absolutely laid the groundwork for Todd Blanche to have a difficult confirmation. And I think she used her time in that closed-door session where she was sworn under oath in front of Congress as the former Attorney General and as Todd Blanche's former boss to say he ran the whole process and he was in charge of the whole release and the Dow's at 50,000. Right? And so she's now laid the groundwork for that to be a confirmation where Democrats can essentially have a layup and say, there's no way I could vote for this guy. I can't. This is about women. This is about protecting. Because like you said, other people have noticed this has been a politically toxic issue for the president. I'm sure there's a lot we're going to disagree on, but on the topic of the slush fund and answering to the president, I think we should agree on the facts. And what the facts are is that the creation of this fund, it's not a slush fund, it's an anti-weaponization fund. Why do we have the fund? Okay. Why do we have the fund?
Because Donald Trump wants
because Charles Littlejohn.
To reward the rioters,
let's go through some yes or no questions. IRS contractor Charles Littlejohn pled guilty to leaking President Trump's tax returns. Yes or no?
Yes.
Before we go,
he
and
also
400,000 other Americans.
He also pled guilty. So we know. Then we also have.
But why does Trump get $1 billion?
What does that have to do? What does that have to do with a $1.8 billion fund that Trump explicitly said this week was to compensate January 6th rioters who he pardoned?
I think because there are a number of people who have felt the full weight of the weaponization of the government.
He said this week when he was asked about the fund, he said, "I'm proud I pardoned these people, and they deserve money from the government."
Yeah, because we had grandmas who were in jail for 2 years. We had people who did not commit violent crimes while we watched people do BLM riots in Minnesota and watched them put up links saying donate to relief.
There are many people who did commit violent crimes, and the president himself has said that he wants them to be compensated.
This is a joke.
I'm not just talking about.
I'm really embarrassed for you that you have to defend this because even Republican senators on the Hill are saying that this is ridiculous. And Donald Trump isn't doing himself any favors by pushing this.
Did the Justice Department have to apologize to Donald Trump? Yes or no?
You know what? I let you speak.
No.
The whole
yes
time.
or no?
I let you speak. I didn't interrupt you. Okay? So thank you. Donald Trump is even in trouble now because we've got Tom Tillis, you've got Cassidy, you've got Cornyn, all these people who are raising questions about Trump's decision making here. And I think the big problem is there used to be this principle in the Justice Department called avoiding the appearance of impropriety.
For decades, the Justice Department operated under an unwritten rule that avoiding even the appearance of wrongdoing was nearly as important as avoiding actual misconduct. That's why attorneys general from both Republican and Democratic administrations often stepped away from sensitive cases or put additional layers of separation between political leaders and criminal investigations. The objective wasn't just to ensure fairness, it was to make sure the public had confidence that the process itself was fair. The concern with this proposed fund is that it immediately raises questions about who qualifies for compensation and what criteria are being used. Even if there are individuals who were genuinely treated unfairly by the government, the United States already has established legal paths for addressing those situations through wrongful prosecution claims, civil rights lawsuits, settlements, and court rulings. Creating a separate fund with strong political connections outside those traditional processes is what makes many people uneasy. Politically, this has also become a challenge for Republicans. When lawmakers from your own party begin voicing concerns publicly, it's often a sign that the issue goes beyond ordinary partisan criticism. Many Republican leaders spent years campaigning on government accountability, fiscal responsibility, and limiting executive authority. A multi-billion-dollar fund overseen largely by political appointees naturally raises concerns about whether those principles are being followed consistently. There's also a broader question about fairness and consistency. Conservatives have often criticized government overreach when it affects people they support, and that's a legitimate concern. But that same standard should apply across the board. If accountability is truly the goal, then it must also include transparency about where taxpayer money is going and who ultimately benefits from it. The Justice Department's reputation has already faced significant challenges in recent years. Public trust in major institutions has declined sharply, and controversies like this only add to that growing skepticism. Once people begin to believe that justice is influenced by political relationships rather than facts, evidence, and equal treatment under the law, rebuilding that confidence becomes extremely difficult. At the end of the day, the strongest institutions are not only the ones that follow the law, but also the ones that avoid situations that make Americans question whether that law is being applied fairly and consistently. That's the standard the Justice Department should strive to uphold no matter who occupies the White House. I'm AZidiots on Culture. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel.